I mean, we've got to. Yeah. It was a very good presentation. Okay, it was only Nico and myself was there. I thought it was a very good presentation. I thought it was
And it works for me.
yeah, I did a nice job. I did a nice job. And it's funny because I'm not sure I come up every day from this side.
And watch the other side.
The other side, like, oh my gosh.
Very big right now.
Yeah. So, all right, but yeah, you did a good job, and I think it was in a manner that if they get enough people, it's a great public. Just get the money. Right. So, good. Okay. One. Oh.
That, but not until after. Don't give it to him until after the
No.
meeting.
No, I'm going to give it right back to him. I'm just going to take a picture.
You're just taking a picture.
You'll have it in the bank before you're sitting down. You go in the check.
You know, my kids are
Take
going
a picture of it and send it to the bank for deposit.
Right.
Send it to the deposit in your bank.
Now, when you sign something for that amount, you have to send it to the kids. So, they'll, wow. All right. We're going to be efficient today. So we have a quorum. I call the meeting to order. Item 9C on the agenda, which is an update on I-25 Powers interchange. My understanding that was presented to the CAC, but because of the nature of the presentation, they're going to want a further presentation at a further point in time. And there's nobody here to make that presentation at this point, so I suggest that 9C be removed from the agenda. Do I have a second to? I move to remove 9C from the agenda. Does anybody have a second to that?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It carries. So now we have the agenda with 9C missing. Can I have a motion on the agenda? Do you have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Item 3, public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there anybody from the public who does want to make a presentation? Please come in, introduce yourself, and
Jolene Hausman with Fountain Valley Senior Center. I appreciate your time at the last meeting where I had discussed my concerns about the proposed changes to the specialized transportation rides provided through PPRTA funding through the City of Springs, through Mountain Metro, through One Ride. And my major concern was the for-profit transportation. And after this meeting, I did review both the PPRTA budget and the City of Colorado Springs budget. And in both those budgets, there are line item notes that specialized transportation will only be contracted to local nonprofits. So my concern about the ability to contract out to private companies was abated, and we currently are working well with One Ride to try and negotiate future contracts and how the future of specialized transportation, the City of Colorado Springs, will work.
thank you. Is there anybody else who has a public comment for items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we move to item number 4, the approval of the minutes of our June 12 meeting. May I have a motion? Or any changes?
I wasn't here, so.
I move to approve.
A second? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? There being none, the minutes are approved. Jim, please provide the Citizen Advisory Committee monthly report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Jim Godfrey, Chair of the CAC. Our meeting last week, the City of Colorado Springs brought forth 5 contracts, had good discussion, asked a bunch of questions, and we make a recommendation. The board approve all 5. Just a note, one of the first one is Mark Shuffle Road. I know you guys talked about that last month a little bit. That is an RTA 1 funded project out of the pooled money that was collected up near the end of that process. So just point that out to you. But no questions there, and we make a recommendation on that. The county had a couple of contracts, no issues there from the CAC's perspective. There is a discussion later on your agenda about House Bill 19-1258 that has to do with the Proposition CC, I think it is, that's coming up. The CAC discussed that and unanimously has a recommendation that the board not support that initiative. So that'll make
And Jim, was there a particular reason that that recommendation was made?
The big concern was not trusting the legislature and the fact that if this was approved, that it may negate other funding that was coming into the region, that it may replace other funding and not be additive to, and that was the big concern.
Thank you.
And then just an update, we've had this discussion about the definitions of capital and maintenance. The staff will cover that. They had a good meeting with members of the city and the county on that, and have got some discussion. We're going to take it up next month in our meetings and get into that discussion a little bit. So we'll keep you abreast of that as things come forward. That's all I've got.
All right. Anybody have any questions for Jim regarding the committee monthly report, CAC monthly report? May I have a motion?
CAC.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? There being none, we go to item number 6, monthly financial reports that I understand you are good news.
Oh, it's coming down.
Good afternoon.
Coming down.
So for May, we just received that yesterday. We have $9,166,000 compared to the monthly budget of $8,341,000. So we're $824,000 ahead for the month, or almost 10%, and $4,012,000 for the year to date, or 10.4% on page 1. Page 2, we're ahead actual last year, so actual to actual, $2,285,000, or 5.7%. So doing well. It would be nice to be able to have enough this year to pay CDOT the rest of the $10 million.
Yes,
So
since CDOT's representative is here, to date, we are roughly in the $2.8 million
right,
good for paying towards CDOT's obligation
for
this year.
this year,
Okay.
right. So, okay, are there any questions on the financials?
I was going to ask, anybody have any questions on item 9A, the financials? Seeing none, we can go to 9B.
So today is the day of the amended budget public hearing. Staff requests that the chair open the public hearing to receive public comment, and then after the board discussion of the budget, the board approved the resolutions to adopt the amended budget and appropriate the funds.
All right. So I am opening the hearing to the public. We are amending the budget because we have a revised amount of money that's available. A carryover. So with that, does anybody from the public have any comments on the amended budget? Yes, Ms. Hausman?
Houseman, yeah. So Jillian Houseman, Fountain Valley Senior Center again. With the extra carryover funds, I would like to say that as a representative of specialized transportation, I'm disappointed that the request didn't go out for additional funds when the program ran short in the last fiscal year, and we went to ride priority, no longer giving seniors or the disabled rides to senior centers, day programs, shopping, personal trips, when it was really only short approximately $100,000, and it would have been a very quick, easy fix with the additional funds.
Any other comments? Yes.
Just, I didn't
Ms.
hear you say the magic words. I don't believe that the public hearing is officially open at this point, correct?
I
Did you? Okay, I'm sorry.
I thought I said, if I didn't say the
I
magic
must have been
word,
focused on
please
looking at the
correct
next
me.
agenda item.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. I'm sorry.
I think it's because you're sitting in a different spot. That's got to be it today. Yeah,
All right.
I apologize for that.
Is there any other public comment? With that, the public hearing is closed. Thank you. And so I ask the magic word, please, may I have a motion to approve the amended budget? A second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. Thank you, Bev.
Okay, and then a
amended budget-
motion to appropriate the funds. It could have been part of one motion, but since it wasn't.
Oh, that's right, and the funds are being appropriated to,
Because there's two resolutions, and it
Okay.
could have been part of one motion, but since it wasn't.
I move to appropriate the funds. Second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Done
Thank
very
you.
well, Bev, thank you. Item number 7A, City of Colorado Springs 2019 Capital Maintenance and Public Transportation Contracts. Mr. Chavez.
Good afternoon, board members. Mike Chavez, City Engineering. Got 5 items for your consideration today. First one is approval of a construction contract to Lawrence Construction to complete, or to build the bridge over Sand Creek at the Mark Sheffel alignment. This is using RTA 1 funds, and it will use up the remaining funds that are allocated to the North Mark Sheffel project.
Okay. Any questions on the first contract? Go ahead and proceed.
Next item is change order to AECom for some additional final design work that they are doing or did do, and then construction management for the Sierra Madre Vermejo Street reconstruction, and that is RTA portion is $1.2 million, and that is part of that 3.2 that was approved last month.
Any questions on contract number 2? Please continue.
Next item is a change order to Wildcat for the Pikes Peak reconstruction, and it's we have not been bringing those change orders to you because we're under policy 12, which anything under 100,000 and less than 5% of the total contract, we don't need to, but this one is over the 100,000 limit, so per the policy, we need to come for your approval. This will probably be, there might be one more change order, but this kind of is close to finalizing the contract. We had some overruns, and the memo explains some of the extra costs, some extra paving. There was some other items that just necessitate a change order. And if there's any questions on that.
Any questions on contract 3? Please continue, sir.
Next one is final design contract for the airport bridge over Spring Creek for Wilson Wilson and Company. They did do some preliminary work to get to a cost estimate, and then this is just a task, or I'm not sure if it's a task order or a change order to their contract, but it's for final design.
Any questions on contract 4? Please continue.
And the last item is a change order to Wildcat, basically adding more funds to their contract for Sierra Madre and Vermejo. We only awarded partially awarded the contract previously, and we're adding $11 million, almost 12, $10 million of other funds, and then 1.9 of RTA.
Any questions on contract 5? It looks like Mr. Williams does.
Move approval.
Oh, no, he doesn't.
All the contracts there.
Of all the contracts, do I have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Now, Mr. Chavez, I understand Mr. Lojinos has some questions for clarification of last week's or last month's
Thank you. So, we spoke a few minutes before this, and so on last month's board meeting, we had a presentation on PPRTA funding for Van Buren, which included road dieting, and there was concerns about two things. One, the bigger one was it's not a PPRTA project, and having funds go to the project, and that was rejected by this board. You told me that the city is still moving forward to use PPRTA funds on Van Buren Street to include road dieting, even though we voted no. You're using a different pot of money, but it's still PPRTA money. So I'm a little confused and concerned that this board said no, and then you are you're saying that you will be coming forward in another month or two to appropriate. Actually, you're going forward with contracts already, request? Even though we voted no, you're going forward with the contract request?
Well, we haven't put out the bid. So let me.
Okay.
So what we have two funding sources in the A-list projects. They're the pedestrian improvements, Phase 1, and school and safety pedestrian improvements. And basically, that's what we call our missing sidewalk funds, and it's an A-list capital program that we use to put missing sidewalk throughout the city. Generally, the bulk of the money is used by Ryan Phipps, is the one who runs the program, and he's got a list. He did an evaluation a few years ago, and we inventoried all of this missing sidewalk in the city, and we've broken that up into 4 quadrants that mimic the street operations quadrants, and he's gone in there and he's prioritized what sections of sidewalk in each quadrant are the priority. Now, there's more sidewalk needed than there's money, so he does the priority. The priorities are near schools, heavy pedestrian corridors, and he just kind of rotates around, and when he gets done, he'll circle back to the quadrants and hit the next round of less prioritized corridors. Part of the money we've used of the missing, and I'll just call it missing sidewalk, even though it's not the name, it's pedestrian improvements. Part of the missing sidewalk money we usually hold in reserve to help projects that come up short. We've used it for grant match. So, example, Cascade Avenue north of Fillmore, there was a large transit grant and CDBG money to put all the sidewalk that's missing in there, and that's something we've been trying to do for the 20-plus years I've been at the city. There's never funding to put a sidewalk on that, and it's a bus route too, so there's always a lot of foot traffic. So we had the grant money and the CDBG money went out to bid, and we are still short, so we used about $200,000 of the missing sidewalk money to supplement that project, and we finished that stretch, so it was just leveraging funds. We are doing something similar on Fillmore. The bus route is being relocated to Fillmore Street between El Paso and to the west near, I forget, over there by the railroad tracks. And we got grant money, FTA grant money that's doing one side. We got CDOT grant money that's doing the south side. But again, we're a little short on our estimates, so I came to the board a couple months ago and asked to move some money from Academy to the Missing Sidewalk program so we can help fund that. Similar situation with Van Buren. We anticipated being short on it, so I asked for additional funds so that we didn't cut into it, but the board did turn that down. But we do have funds available in the budget currently, so I am expecting to come to the board with a contract, and we're going to request that some of the missing sidewalk funds be used on the Van Buren project because we're a little short. We've got grant money from CDOT that was just short. When we estimated, we didn't put enough money in. The city's bike tax funding is paying for the road dieting portion. That basically is we're going to fog coat the road and restripe it. So that's getting paid more by city. But we're short on the concrete, the pedestrian sidewalks and the sidewalks and the pedestrian ramps. We anticipate being short on it. So when we bid it out, depending on what the bids come in, I will bring a contract for approval with this board, and we'll request that a certain amount of the missing sidewalk funds be used to help leverage and complete that project.
So 2 comments, and then if that's okay. So one, which was the second concern I had, was you keep saying, you've said it multiple times, pedestrian and sidewalks. But this, part of this funding will go to on-street well, it sounds like the road dighting is on-street, that's not sidewalk. And then once again, that none of that mitigates what the biggest concern last month, as was reiterated by several board members, was the credibility of providing funds to a non-PPRTA project as we go forward, potentially having to ask the residents to vote on a PPRTA 3. Your background information there is very important. Again, this does not change the concerns that were brought up last month at all. So, and then again, my concern is the board made a decision. I mean, it didn't pass unanimously, but I understand some people didn't like the board's decision. But it sounds like somebody on the Colorado Springs staff didn't like our decision and is still moving forward with the exact same scenario, even though we said no. And without the situation changing, it's just a different part of, and I'll stop there. It's a different part of PPRTA money. The scenario is exactly the same. I don't understand why this happened. It looks like we made a decision, and some people do not want to abide by the decision.
Right, and just, we did have a chance to talk about this at lunch. It's important to clarify what the decision was made last month. There was a request for a transfer from one PPRTA project to the sidewalk funds, the missing sidewalk funds, in order to fund this project and additional projects. The decision was to not approve that line item transfer. There was no discussion. There was no motion, and there was no declaration that the board was prohibiting the city in any way from using existing sidewalk funds on this project. At least that's my understanding. If there is a disagreement with that, I talked to Ms. Ivy. I get the two of you confused. I think I have Alzheimer's. I do. And I say that.
That's okay. I've lost my hearing
that's
today,
inappropriate. That if this is something that we want to bring up, it isn't noticed as a motion or an item today, so it would have to be a request from Mr. Gonzalez to bring this back at the next meeting to see what level of supervision or oversight this board wants to choose to exercise over its member governments in the application of money. But my understanding, Mr. Chavez, is the money that you are intending to come and ask this board about for the sidewalks is money that's currently in the missing sidewalk fund.
Yes.
And that the modifications to the roadway itself are going to be paid by the city on the bicycle tax and grant funds.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, one more question.
Mr. Williams, yes.
Mike, how much money is left in the sidewalk fund over the, because I'm not looking at the reports from last month, but I thought there is no money left in the sidewalk fund, that we're actually over the original estimate.
We have not spent most of this year's allocation because the contractor hasn't started. So I guess that, and there's a two-part question there is, so the original, and it wasn't really an estimate, but the original target amount, I think I have put more money into that sidewalk program because there's just a lot of need. So it's higher than the original target that was the thing. But as far as this year's, what we budgeted, we have money still in the bank, and that's why I can come with the Van Buren project and fund it out of this year's allocation.
So let me make sure I understand. So when we put Pikes Peak RTA 2 in front of the voters, there was an estimate of the amount that would be spent for this particular project.
I don't know if that was on the ballot.
No, it wasn't on the ballot, but it was part of the supporting documentation that was there. We had to put some limit on the length of a ballot. So we put it was part of the discussion, and there was a number. And then earlier, I guess last year or late last year, the board approved a number in excess of that, which accounts for some inflation and some other things, that was budgeted for this year, for this project, even though, and so the board approved going in excess of the original estimate in its budget process. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And then some of that money that is budgeted, you're then using not from transferring any additional money, because there's no money left to transfer. I think that was the message of the board. But within that amount that's already been budgeted, you're cutting something else so this can be done, essentially.
No, we're not cutting what we usually reserve about $250,000 to have in reserve for projects that need supplemental help. Fillmore,
So are you?
Cascade, and I think we have enough for Van Buren. I just wanted to, bring more money in because the academy money is not needed, so I wanted to bring that in so that Ryan could continue with his, his full list that he had programmed originally and still be able to help.
Okay. The academy money is still needed because we've got all of the other Category A and then Category B projects that have to be done. So it's not like it may not be needed to be spent this year.
Yeah, and we'll bring it back. Again, I've said.
But there's no money to take it back from.
There are future
in this
budget.
line item.
Yeah, there are.
You're taking it from other projects. You're taking away from other Category A and Category B projects to fund it.
I'm not taking anything from any Category A projects because I've projected out and we have enough money in the A projects. With inflation, I mean, I've inflated some of the budgets that I know, like Academy. That I program out and we think we're going to be able to fund them fully and be finished with
Right.
23 and
But there's also a sidewalk project sidewalk in Category B. And what this board's direction was last time is that before we start doing those excess projects in the sidewalk fund, that we need to prioritize amongst all the different Category B projects, not just by shuffling money in and by calling it into A as opposed to B, because A is funded. So to the extent we are funding Van Buren, there's no money left to fund anything else in sidewalks. So when you present this budget or this contract, I'm going to want to make sure that the contingencies are taken care of for all of these other things, because there's no money left in this line item.
Yeah.
There is no money left in this line item. Let me make that clear.
But I know from the budget we have about 200 in reserve,
Okay.
and that's what I'm planning on using for Van Buren.
And what I'm saying is, if that's what you're using, that's within the spirit of what the board said, because the board budgeted it. But there's no money if you have a cost overrun in one of the other projects, so we have to make darn certain.
Well, we'll do that. Yeah, I understand. I know what you're saying, and we are aware of that.
Is there any other discussion on this?
It sounds like it's,
Let's go, Mr. Stevens first.
Just to clarify, it sounds like there's two simultaneous projects taking place on Van Buren. One is related to sidewalks, one is related to road dieting. Is that accurate?
No, there's one project that includes, it's pedestrian and bicycle access. It's a CDOT-funded project that's got some city match funds, it's got city bike tax fund, and then it'll probably need some RTA Mississippi Sidewalk Fund to complete the project. This is a challenge that we've been having, is that projects are more expensive than the one source of funds, so we look and combine funds to complete the project. So we have one project, and we've got grant funds, city funds, and possibly RTA funds. The RTA Mississippi Sidewalk funds are available, and we will be able to put some into the Van Buren project and still complete our other missing sidewalk segments that we have planned.
You weren't helping. The line of thinking that I was going down is you may have one contract and it may be one project, but let me try this. Is it two phases that you can differentiate and say one is sidewalk related and one is road dieting related?
No. The grant specifically states that we are to do all the sidewalk and the installing bicycle lanes. That is the grant, and that's the scope of work that needs to be done.
Mr. Chair, so again, for me, credibility. So I'm going to use what you said. You specifically said you have this funding from the city, you have this funding from this, you have this funding from the bike, and we can use PPRTA because we're over. So again, it's not the plan. It was not the plan. You need extra money. The city needs extra funds, and they're saying, well, let's get it from PPRTA. That's essentially what you said in saying that, well, there's some dollars, we can get it from the PPRTA. So it's not part of the plan. It was never part of the plan, and because there's dollars in PPRTA, the city is asking for that money. And it's, again, I think it just lowers the credibility of PPRTA when we go forward in 3 years or so for this vote.
I'm going to invite Mr. Godfrey to come up, and he's not even expecting to come up. But it's important that I think, Jim, and if I put you on the stand, on the spot, I apologize, but my understanding from our previous discussion and from some emails that I've received is that some members of the Citizens Advisory Committee has asked for clarification about these sorts of projects, about going forward, and that a presentation is being presented. At least my understanding is that the city has agreed to provide a presentation to CAC going forward so that there can be some kind of clarification and clarity and monitoring of these sorts of concerns. Do you want to elaborate on that? Or?
Yes, so a couple of things. One, I've been on record of criticizing some of these funds because of a lack of visibility. At the same time, we understand how important these program funds are. They're defined in their scope in terms of what they do. They are A-list items. They're funded annually based on their requirements that go forward, not a number for a 10-year period. But as a CAC, we haven't taken a deep dive into these projects in terms of you've got $8 or $5 or $10 million allocated to these projects. What do you plan to do with that? We haven't taken that deep dive. I went back and listened to the board video and audio from last month's meeting, and we had a long discussion in the CAC last week, and we've asked the city to come forward with the details of the details of these program funds. What's in them? What are you planning on doing? What's your spend plan? So that we know exactly what's in there. I've been critical. Some of you know I spent a career in budgeting execution and long-term fiscal planning in the Air Force, billions of dollars of budget at the MAGCOM Air Force and levels. And there's always the question of show me your spend plan, what's your execution rate, and what do you plan to do with it before you ask for more money. And so that's kind of the context that we want to try to take a deep dive in the CAC with. And our intention would be to come to you with a little more information and details about what's in these plans. The city needs flexibility. It would be impractical to start listing 100 individual intersection improvements on an A-list item. They need flexibility to be able to do that with timing of other work going on and those kinds of things. And so that's been what the city has used these for. But there are a fair amount of money wrapped up in these budget projects, and we feel like that as a CAC we should take a deep dive at this point, and maybe we should have done it sooner, but we're going to try to get it done.
And my understanding is tentatively that's scheduled for the next CAC meeting.
That's correct.
Okay. Does anybody have any further questions for Mr. Godfrey? I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed with where the CAC has decided to go with this. Thank you, sir. And again, I apologize to put you on the spot. Mr. Waller, I think you had some questions.
I'm good.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Suggestions to move forward? All right.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Item 9B, I gotta get my glasses. El Paso County Maintenance and Public Transportation Contracts. Yes, Jennifer?
Jennifer Irvin, County Engineer. Good.
Jennifer's. I'm going to do that, okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Board of Directors. Last month in our update and our forecasting for all of our projects, I talked about 2 contracts that I would be bringing to you this month. These are those 2 contracts. The first is our design contract for South Academy Boulevard. This is for about $1.4 million, and this contract will include going to preliminary design to about 60% design for this project. In this case, we didn't go ahead and do 100% design because we have several bridges along this corridor that we need to evaluate and see what kind of improvements that we need at those locations. So I think this provides a tight scope of work and a tight cost, and so we will be coming back at a future date for additional design contracts for that project. As you know, we also talked about the build grant last month, and that is moving forward, and we do expect to submit that on July 15th in coordination with CDOT. So appreciate your support on that.
Any questions for this Jennifer regarding the bridges she has to cross before she comes back?
At least it's a bridge to somewhere and not nowhere. Second item is our Highway 105 contract amendment. This is for $860,000. Last month I talked to you about moving forward with the final design for the second phase of the project, and that's from Lake Woodmore out east and essentially the remaining 4 miles of that project. We had previously completed preliminary design for just the first, for the entire corridor, and did final design for the first phase since that had partial federal funding, and so now we're ready to go on to the second phase, and so that's what this encompasses. And this will be to 90% design so that we can get a good handle on that before we do finish the final 10% and then property acquisition. So again, we'll be coming back to you with another phase of that contracting.
Mr. Williams?
Move approval of the 2 items.
Second.
Did you have questions? No. Okay. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for your consideration.
Item 9C, City of Manitou Springs. It looks like Shelley?
Almost.
Almost.
Jeff Jones, Deputy Public Service.
You're not, yeah, I'm saying you're not.
I am not Shelley, but she is.
Oh, there she is. I see it. Okay, wrong side. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, the effort I'd like to talk to you about today is the restoration and preservation of the masonry walls in the Ruxton Creek Box Bridge. The original PPRT allocation was $200K. We have a quote from our stonemason Aguave landscape masonry of $76,262. And with that, the restoration would involve rebuilding and stabilizing sections of the wall where needed. The setting of the new stones needed at the base of the wall where the creek has deteriorated the lower courses of the stones. And approximately would take 5 weeks, depending on weather and variances in the creek levels of completion of this project.
Any questions from Mr. Jones?
Move
Motion
approval.
to, second? Second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
All right, item 9D is Jennifer Prime, ratify filing for interpleader in the DRX manner.
So this item, there was a memo in your packet sort of giving the overview. This is a contract between the PPRTA, DRX, and the City of Colorado Springs. They were doing some televising services for a PPRTA project. I think about 5 months ago or so, the city first received a UCC filing stating that DRX, the contractor, owed money, and so a UCC filing had been made and claiming that the funds should be paid over to a merchant advance company, basically a collections agency. DRX refuted those claims and was demanding payment from the city through PPRTA, or through the city from PPRTA. Because of this dispute of who should be paid, the city and PPRTA know that they owe $44,000 to someone. The city's legal team looked at this, and we consulted, and the recommendation was that we file an interpleader action. Essentially what that means, fancy word for, we give the court the money and say, you guys fight it out and litigate it, and the court will then release the money to whoever it's owed to, and it really releases the city and the PPRTA from any liability for those funds and saves a bunch of legal fees and back and forth. Of course, this came to a head about a week after your last meeting, and because of concerns that a suit might be filed for non-payment of that money, I brought this to your management staff and your leadership, chair and vice chair, and got direction to go ahead and file the interpleader. At this point, we've actually gotten the court order, and the funds are being deposited with the court, so we are off the hook for that payment. I also understand that this contract was a task order-based contract, and there are no open task orders and no future expected task orders, so we don't believe that there will be any future liabilities or payments that need to be made. So what I'm looking for today is just a ratification of the filing of that interpleader.
Mr. Williams? Oh, so moved. Okay.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Item 8A, City of Colorado Springs Transit Services Monthly Report. Craig?
Good afternoon. Craig Blewett, Transit Services Manager with City of Colorado Springs. Our monthly report is in your packet. Just a couple highlights. Our local bus route service, we did see an increase of about 5.5% of ridership compared to May of 2018. And on ADA service, we actually saw a decrease of about 7% compared to the same month last year. Van pools declined about 6.7% in one-way trips. What I can tell you, once again, our occupancy rate in the vans is at about 95%. So we run the number of vans that supports the number of participants in the program, and we're running full vans to where we're going, mostly Denver, but other places as well. Also want to report out, we are going through the public process for our proposed fall 2019 service changes, and we had 2 meetings yesterday, public meetings yesterday. We're having our 3rd and final meeting this evening. Yesterday was a pretty good turnout. I mean, we're adding service, so you tend to get less people out for a public meeting when you're adding service compared to when you're cutting service. But we had about 7 to 10 people at each of the meetings yesterday, and we expect a good turnout this evening as well. I also wanted to, there were some comments last month from Jolene Hausman and Gail Nells of Fountain Valley Senior Center and Envita, respectively. I do want to respond to those, and let's see, I'm not wearing my glasses, so where's the button that raises it, makes it bigger? I'm going to guess down here. If you would, yes. Oh, great, and I can advance with the arrow keys? Okay, sounds great. So I just want to respond to the comments that were made last month. And just a quick overview on the Human Service Transportation Program. The purpose is to provide rides for seniors and people with disabilities beyond the requirements of the ADA law. So what is the ADA law? ADA requires us to provide up to door-to-door service, transit service for people with disabilities who, because of their disability, cannot use the fixed route bus system. We are to provide a comparable transit service within our fixed route bus service area, which is considered to be within 3/4 of a mile of a bus route during the days and times that we run that bus route. So what the Human Service Transportation Program is above and beyond ADA, right? So it's for rides outside our fixed route service area and trips inside the fixed route service area for those who need more assistance inside the home. And this is a difficult map to read, but what it's intended to show is really where the bus routes are in the Colorado Springs metropolitan area, urbanized area, and the shading around that shows a three-quarter mile boundary around those routes. So within that shading area, that's where we provide ADA service up to door-to-door, and we're required to provide every ride that's requested in that area during the days and times that the respective route runs. In 2018, just looking at the ridership of our different programs, our fixed route bus provided about 3.1 million rides, ADA Metro Mobility, that's the ADA service we provide, about 166,000, 167,000 rides. And the human service providers, with the funds that we provided through city and PPRTA money, about 44,000 rides. So total demand response with, for seniors and people with disability is about 210,000 rides. And that represents about 6% of our overall rides and about 30% of our operating budget. So they are valuable rides to provide, but they are expensive. In terms of our contracting for human service, our current contracts began July 1st of 2018 through a competitive procurement process. We did an RFP process. Through that process, we selected Silver Key, Fountain Valley Senior Center, Invita, and Community Intersections. And that contract had a base year plus 4 one-year options. Starting January 1st of this year, we restricted the use of that funding for certain trip purposes. So it could only be used for purposes for dialysis or trips for dialysis and other medical purposes, jobs, or education. And that was to keep the monthly expenses within 1/12 of the annual budget. So what was happening the first few months of our contracts, we were going through more money than we could afford each month. So we had to scale that back, and we did that by restricting the purpose to those 3 purposes I talked about earlier. And actually, in those first few months of those contracts, we were denying dialysis trips, and we didn't want to be in that position. So we met with the executive directors from all 4 contractors on September 18th, 2018, to seek solutions to that burn rate. And we didn't really get any additional solutions. This is the solution that we used. For contract options, we did exercise options with all 4 contractors, although one is limited to 3 months. Concerns raised at last month's board meeting. No city or PPRTA funding for trips to senior centers was a voiced concern. As I just mentioned, it was a budgeting necessity. We needed to restrict to medical, job, and education trips, given their priority. And there was alternative funding available through the Area Agency on Aging for some of those other trips to senior centers. Second concern was that nonprofit agencies were not consulted with the restricted trip purpose solution. That's not true, but we did have that meeting with all 4 agencies in September, and no additional budget solutions were offered at that time. Another concern was that a new RFP is open to for-profit companies, and that is true. We are testing the market on that. There was a recommendation of the Transit Solutions team in 2012. We do recognize that there were some notes associated with the budget lines, both in the city and PPRTA. At the time, those were intended to be descriptive and not prescriptive, and nonetheless, that language is there. And finally, another concern was that nonprofit agency drivers get to know their riders, so they could recognize if the rider is having some problems. And so what I would say in response to that is our Metro Mobility ADA drivers also get to know their riders quite well, and they are from a for-profit organization or company.
Hey, Craig, can you hold for a second? Mr.
Sure.
Gonzalez has a question.
Yeah, there's discussion. So you're authorized to utilize for-profits?
So right now, there is language associated with both budgets that says that funding is used to fund nonprofit agencies. With that language, we would not proceed without a discussion first.
So are you allowed to use for-profits or not?
There is not. The only restriction is in the budget with that language associated with the budget lines. That would be the only restriction that we would have.
I'm sorry, but this is like the second or third time I've asked questions of certain entities, and I don't mean to take it out on you. Where I ask a question, I don't get an answer. So, well, yeah, I kind of like would yes or no, and apologize for taking it on you. This has happened multiple times when I ask a question. I sometimes don't get an answer. So I was asking for a yes or no. So
the answer would be no. We would not move forward with that without a discussion with the board.
But now I apologize because now, again, you just did it.
I just said no.
And just to clarify, my understanding is you're sending out an RFP to see what for-profits would propose And as I understand what you're saying is you would come back to PPRTA, you would come back to the city to say, this is the contract. If there is a proposal that you think is acceptable and offers the best interest for the riders and for you, you might say, we want to have for-profit as an alternative.
Yes.
That was not the public answer given. It absolutely in the contract proposal conference.
But that's not where we're going with this. And Mr. Waller, I think.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's appropriate to have comment. I mean, we try to capture all this for the record.
Right.
If you have a comment, open it up
That's a
to
good
public
point.
comment and have people come up to the microphone.
And the comment, it would be a public hearing and a public process if, in fact, your proposal was we want to use for-profit companies. People could talk about that, and then the decision would be City Council, PPRTA Board at that point, if they want to change that note.
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm not sure where Mr. Gonzalez is. I was hoping that clarified things for him, but I don't see him. Anybody else have any questions, or if you want to go ahead and proceed, Mr. Boyd?
Sure, just a final point. Another point was that nonprofit agency drivers get to know their riders well and can recognize when they're having a problem. We also, through our Metro Mobility ADA program, our drivers are also very receptive and very observant. They go through driver sensitivity training to ensure that they're trained to work with the customers that they have, and that is with a for-profit company. So it's not really something that's limited to a nonprofit agency in terms of being observant and understanding the riders. And that's my final slide. You have to answer any further questions.
Do you have a time frame? Is the RFP active now? Is it going out? When's it close? And when would you suggest, if there is a suggested change, when would you be coming back?
So the RFP closed some time ago, last week or the week before last, and so we are reviewing the proposals at this time. And so, yeah, if we were to go in a different direction, we would be coming back soon, probably this board, probably next month, if that were to happen.
First on the board, does anybody have any Mr. Williams?
Craig, thanks for providing the additional information. This is kind of my comment of where I am as a board member, which is transit exists to serve citizens who need transit, not to employ government agencies, not to fund nonprofits, not to fund profits. We exist to provide service for citizens. And that's why when we created the Pikes Peak RTA, we stuck that 10% for transit. We wanted to provide those services, and we ought to provide those services in the best way possible. And whether that is government, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a for-profit, I'm agnostic. What I care about is the best service for the citizens. I know that we use in the main part of transit those, 2.1 million rides?
3.1 million.
3.1 million rides. That most of those are provided by for-profit companies. Is that correct?
Yes.
So certainly we've used for-profit companies. We've used nonprofits. The city running its own system was done at one point. I think we got more efficient results from using other outside groups. But, if we need to go through a budget process, if the best deal for the citizens, the riders, is one particular method over another, then we ought to be looking out for the riders who actually use the transit system as opposed to funding government or nonprofit or for-profit.
Ms. Avila.
As a rider of Metro Mobility and of fixed routes, I think it is important that when it's for profit, it's about the bottom line, and it's not necessarily the service to the passengers. So I would like to caution you and when we have those contracts like we do with Metro Mobility, they change from, they put in the bids how often, Craig?
I'm sorry?
So we had National Express. We've gone through a lot of for-profit
So it's about
agencies, right?
3 to 7 years, depending on the performance of the contractor, yes.
And so it does make a difference in the service when it is for profit. I've noticed it with Metro Mobility. I've noticed it. I mean, they're hard on their drivers as well. I mean, there was one point when a new company came in, they took out all the radios from all the cars. I mean, all the buses, claiming that they were avoiding accidents. So without any data. So I think it does matter when it's for profit. And yes, you might get it much cheaper, but at what cost? At what cost to the rider? So, and I'm going through that right now with Z-Trip. I mean, they don't have to provide the services that Metro Mobility does, but it's for profit there too, and they do the bare minimum. And as soon as you get to know a driver and feel comfortable with the driver, they make sure that you change up your drivers as much as possible. You're not allowed to request that driver, even though that driver is available. I know about that because I was suspended for having allegedly requested a driver from using Z-Trip. So it does make a difference.
Any other comments from the board members? I see an interest from Ms. Hausman. I'm going to allow her to talk, given that she's the one who started this, if there's no objection. Ms. Hausman, do you have a comment?
Charlene Hausman, Fountain Valley Senior Center. First, I'd like to say I'm highly disappointed that this slideshow was not included in Mountain Mobility's initial monthly report. So I had no prior knowledge that this would be spoken about today. I would like to note on here that the second bullet point is extremely misleading. I don't know that any dialysis trip was ever denied at all. I know all 4 subcontractors prioritize dialysis over any other trip because it is a life or death trip. And on this bullet point about not consulted with the restricted trip purposes, that September meeting, we were called into a room and specifically told that the trip purposes were going into effect. We were not consulted. Even Joe Urban at PPACG had recommended against trip priorities and purposes. And then we were told it was a budget issue and it would go away starting this new budget cycle. And that's why all the nonprofits really had Mountain Metro's back and were not vocal about this, because it was our understanding that it was a temporary solution to a temporary budget issue. And then we found out that it would continue. And so we weren't consulted. We did offer solutions. It's been nothing but a solution offering event for the past 9 months. Just none of our solutions were actually accepted. And as far as the new RFP, I believe I'm the only nonprofit potentially that applied for the new RFP because it was a super short window. It was less than 30 days. It was initially like 13 days, and they extended it. But even their grants that they applied to the FTA are allowed bigger windows. So it was a very tight turnaround, and it was just not a well-thought-out process. So in the meantime, there's stopgap contracts, there's temporary contracts, there's solutions because the nonprofits went to Mountain Metro to ensure that no vulnerable citizen in our community goes without rides to their doctor, to dialysis, work, and education. And then we ensure that all citizens still get to senior centers, day programs, personal shopping, and everything else, because we will not allow people to become isolated in their homes.
Thank you. Please approach, state your name.
Gail Nels, CEO with Invita, and we are one of the HSPs listed in the call center contract. I really don't think it's appropriate for me as a representative of the human service providers in the community to do a he said, she said at this time and refute some of the comments of City Transit and Mr. Blewett. But I would like to point out that as a human service provider and going above and beyond, we go into people's homes. So we do know the circumstances of the people we're more familiar than anything that could be done by Metro Mobility. And we have done some sexual assault investigations because we've seen things. And we've gone with adult protection services as well. That is what we do, and it is our mission in the community to support. We believe we provide better service at a lower cost if we were allowed to manage our contracts as we had in the past. And I will say one comment that is a bit of a he said, she said. I don't believe the RFP was, how about this? The comments here I think are misrepresented about the RFP process.
Anybody else from the community back here? Obviously, this is something that is going to be going forward from what Mr. Blewett said. So it will be back here again. Any comments, thoughts? All right, thank you, Mr. Blewett.
Thank you.
Item 8B, update on the Rock Rimmon project. Cole, I believe. Trying to read your name, it says Coldplay, which is one of my favorite bands.
No, I'm Cole Platt. I'm with operations.
Right, I just can't read right.
I've been married 19 years. I've been called worse than that. We wanted to bring you guys a monthly update on Rock Rimmon. This is a contract that you guys approved here a few months ago, and we just kind of want to bring you up to speed on where we're at in the project. So this is the project limits. It's Rock Rimmon Boulevard from Vindicator to Pro Rodeo. It stops just short of the I-25. There is a future project with traffic that we're going to try to tie on to the end of this one, but they're doing some design work on that right now. So this first phase of this project is just to Pro Rodeo. We've got the north side going. We wanted to share some pictures with you. A lot of times you guys don't see, where the money's going, so we wanted to share some of that with you. We're removing curb and gutter on the north side of the roadway. We're definitely getting compaction. We're putting in good Class 6 aggregate base course and getting good compaction underneath this roadway. There's your new curb and gutter. We have had some setbacks, if you will. The contractor put in approximately 600 lineal feet of 4-foot sidewalk that was out of spec. So they had to tear that out and try again at their expense, of course. So that set us back time-wise, and weather has really got us up there this trip. So that's some of the sidewalk that, after it was torn out and put back, that now is within ADA spec. This project is scheduled to be completed October 31st. We are a little bit behind, as you can see. Completed, we've got, I can't even read that. With the days spent, we are way behind, so we had to change our phasing. Our first idea was to go in and remove all the curb and gutter, come back and do the road section. It is a full reconstruct using a grid underneath. We are putting a wick drain underneath to try to keep that water from reaching the soil so this project will last. So now we're doing road work and curb and gutter work at the same time to try to make those days up that weather has cost us. Completed work this period, 200 lineal feet of curb and gutter. I will tell you that we did 700 feet this morning by 10 o'clock. We had a curb machine out there, so we're picking up the pace. That's what's upcoming for the next month. We're gonna bring everything to you once a month to kind of give you guys an update on how that's going and what we're projecting out. Like I said, we removed the aggregate, we removed the asphalt, put in new road sections. We are putting a grid underneath it to try to stabilize that poor soil up there. And the concrete, the fence post, we're coordinating with traffic and getting their infrastructure in. So we're going to be putting a new traffic light at fence post also. So we've got their infrastructure as part of our project, so they are not digging up our new sidewalk to put their stuff in. And I think that's it. Do you guys have any questions?
Platt? Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Item 8C, City of Colorado Springs monthly change order and property acquisition report. Mr. Travis.
This is an informational item. Are there any questions on any of the items?
Doesn't appear to be. Thank you, sir. Item 8D, El Paso County monthly change order and property acquisition report. Jennifer.
Same. I'd happy to answer any questions if there are any.
None. Thank you so much. Item 8E, staff field review report. Rick?
This is also an information report of my field confirmation of what the 5-member governments have reported being completed in the prior quarter.
Any questions? Seeing none, we will go to 9A, House Bill 19-1258, approval of statewide ballot in November.
The legislature approved and the governor signed House Bill 19-1258, setting up a statewide November ballot measure to ask the voters to designate revenues, state revenues collected in excess of Tabor cap to go 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 to public schools, higher education, and roads, bridges, and transit in equal shares. This was presented to the PPRTA CAC last week, asking them if they wanted to recommend to the board that the board support this November ballot measure, oppose it, or take no position. And the CAC unanimously recommended that the board oppose the November ballot measure that's set up by this House bill.
And the one thing that I would just share is I have been advised, I think, other council members yesterday.
Will you talk into the mic?
That other council members were advised yesterday by our lobbyists that there is some movement afoot to amend this House bill and to amend the language. So it may be even premature to address, since it won't even be on. This may not even be the provision that is on the ballot. So I would suggest that we just revisit this a month from now. Mr. Williams.
So I want to share some background information and some additional info. And some of you are aware that I have been involved in transportation funding issues for a very long time. I served on Bill Ritter's advisory panel for his Blue Ribbon Commission. There's certainly a need statewide. We see that in the small and paltry allocations we get. It's exacerbated by the fact that the Pikes Peak area, and particularly El Paso County, when you compare population, has about half the lane miles per citizen of any other jurisdiction, which means that when you fund maintenance only, which is what CDOT does right now, if you have less, you get less, and it never gets better. And that's the current system. The problem with this initiative is that it promises a third, a third, a third, but that promise is not in the initiative. It is instead in statute, which means any legislature, Representative Waller may remember this being up there, any legislature can change that allocation without a vote of the people. And so those of you who've been around for a while remember Ref C, which promised the money would go to, and this is a pretty much a direct quote from the initiative, education, healthcare, roads, bridges, and other strategic transportation projects, close quote. So 5 things. 3 of those, roads, bridges, and strategic transportation projects, according to data from the state, have gotten about 1% of the money. And education and healthcare has gotten 99% of the money. So I'm concerned about the current CC that doesn't have that promise of where it actually will go in any enforceable way. That's very different from the Pikes Peak RTA ballot issue that we put on the ballot that had specific allocations and also had, and I think that discussion's a little bit later today on one of these, a maintenance of effort requirement. There is no maintenance of effort requirement in this. So the legislature would be free to credit these funds and then sweep out the funds that are going to those purposes currently and use them for anything they wanted. It does not have the guardrails. I talked to the governor about this when the bill was introduced. I talked to him about it a couple weeks ago. That's the problem with CC. I'm fine waiting to see if the legislature does anything. But in its present incarnation, there's no promise Now, the governor has told me he would not change the allocation, which is worth 7 years at best. But this is a infinity change that goes on in perpetuity, and there's no promise that comes along with it as to where the money goes. So I have great concerns about CC. I agree with the Citizens Committee.
Mr. Waller.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you regarding that, but I also agree here that we're a long ways from understanding what's going to happen. I think that there is a better than fair chance that the legislature is going to go back into a special session. That's everything I'm hearing. By the end of the month, they may be in a special session trying to figure out and address this issue. I can tell you maybe it changes, but I'm not hopeful it changes for the better. That's for sure. So, sure, let's wait and see what happens, but then I think we're going to be right where Councilmember Williams suggests we'll be.
So we do have a motion to defer this to next month. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that carries. Rick, and then just as a suggestion, if there is something that comes down from the legislature that modifies this, perhaps we can go back to CAC and then bring it back again.
Very good.
All right. 9B, the maintenance of effort provision in the establishing IGA.
If I might have a piggyback item on 9A, and that
Okay.
is, that's another
There is a
possible
piggyback, yes.
ballot measure. Whenever there's a coordinated election, the El Paso County Office of the Clerk and Recorder sends us an invitation to let them know if we, PPRTA, would like to place a ballot measure on the November 5 upcoming coordinated election. So as staff, we're not aware of any ballot. Of course, 2 years ago there was in 2017 for the GAP project. But is the board desiring to let the Clerk and Recorder's Office know by July 26th that you want to have a ballot measure in November?
During the lunch, Bev said she really wants to do this again. No, we couldn't think of any. Does anybody have any ballot measure that, from a PPRTA standpoint, that you think we should consider?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Now onward to 9B that's in your packet. In February, Director Avila raised some issues regarding the maintenance of effort provision in the IGA. At the time, there was a little bit of discussion among several of the board members, and the chairman postponed it to a future meeting after Merv Bennett's replacement was seated, and we're now at that point. So I'll turn this over to Councilmember Avila if she would like to express her concerns of last February.
Thank you, Rick. I brought this up last time because what I'm concerned is that this is the first time we met. The 2004 maintenance of effort was last year in 2018. And I think that I would like to, we had discussion whether it was aspirational and where it actually says intent. And I really think intent is stronger. But I would like to get something, if we could send this to the CAC and get something more enforceable or stronger, and add maybe inflation or cost of living to this, because in years to come, I think about our grand salary on city council. If we at that time would have added a cost of living or inflation, maybe we wouldn't be at 10 cents an hour. So I would really like to look at this and make sure that this is funded and that we stay in alignment with the rest of the projects or everything else that's going on. So I would hope that I could gain support in that and really looking into that by the CAC.
Mr. Williams.
Yeah, let me give a little historical background, because we did, when we created this IGA, wrestle with this issue. how much can we bind Manitou, Green Mountain Falls, Colorado Springs, El Paso County, because Rama wasn't in yet. How much can we bind them? And in consultation with council at the time, the feeling was that we could not put teeth in it and actually require it. And so that's why you have that aspirational language of it's the intent, because it was the intent, but there was no ability to bind future city councils, future commissioners, and we wrestled with it. It was for a set amount, and there were dollar amounts that we established early on in the Pikes Peak RTA that had to be met. They were not adjusted by inflation. That was never talked about. That was never part of the promise of this. I will tell you that I think that the voters look at whether we're doing what we promised, that if the voters see that we didn't do what we promised, that would be a basis for people to vote no on a renewal. I think on the maintenance side, almost every jurisdiction has made it each year. The city was crappy with respect to their funding of transit. And I'll just say that. Crap, technical term. We didn't do it. We are doing it now. I think the current city council is committed to continue to do that, at least all the ones that I've talked to. But it wasn't an intent that it be an inflationary amount. But certainly cities are free to do that and should, where appropriate, do that. But I don't know if there's a way that this group, this government, can impose a requirement on the other four governments. We couldn't find a way in 2004. Maybe the state of the law has changed, but it also is pretty difficult to bind future boards. I mean, our good mayor of Manitou Springs has announced he's not running for re-election, so I don't know how we can bind his successor very effectively. But I'm open to looking at it if council's seen some change in the law that would allow us to impose this requirement in the last 15 years. But we just couldn't come up with a way, because we tried, council member, we really did, because I wanted it to have teeth, and this is as close as we could get according to the council at the time. And so that's what we put on the ballot.
Mr. Stevens, and then I'll ask Jennifer Esquire.
Contribute a little bit to that history. The other thoughts were, as we bumped up against the lack of teeth this board would have against the member entities, ultimately it comes down to budget approval by this board, whether or not we approve and that entity's proposed budget. So that's the subjective decision that this board then needs to look at. And I think that while doesn't have the teeth that we wish it had, it also does provide the flexibility. And to that end, right around this time, and I don't remember exactly how it shook out, but Green Mountain Falls had a restructuring. So we were bumping into numbers that were greater than what we were contributing, so those numbers changed, but this board was able to look at that information, and it was non-formulaic. It was not a dollar and an increase and what have you, but situations changed, positions changed, dollars changed, and so this board said, yeah, that makes sense, continue on as it was. And so I think that it is important for us to have that subjectivity and do our job as board members and think about the issues, and when things do arise which conflict with the intent that the board had outlined in board policy, to bring it to our attention so we can address it. And we struggled with it with the City of Colorado Springs when City of Colorado Springs made the decision to not fund transit to what it was, and I don't think there's a lot of support for that at this board level. But again, that's the City of Colorado Springs as a member entity of the RTA, and perhaps jeopardizing the overall reputation of the RTA, that made that decision. And throughout the history of the RTA, we've been 5 member entities independent of one another that have come together to accumulate and redistribute this funding, and what that each entity chooses to spend it on is more up to that entity than it is up to this board to a greater extent, and we are guided heavily by the voters' intent and what they've authorized us to do. So it's a fine line, but it's important, and I appreciate the attention to the matter. But I'm with Councilmember Williams that we're kind of hamstrung, and I guess I'm going one step further and saying, to some degree, that's good because it provides a little flexibility and subjectivity, and 2, make sure that we step up as board members and look at the information and hold the entities accountable and put the pressure that we can, when it's appropriate, to honor that intent that the voters clearly intended.
And now we'll refer to council now, because we did talk about this, and it's my understanding that this board's authority comes from the member governments, and that there really, as I understand it, there is no way, as Mr. Williams said, for this board to impose its views on the member governments.
Right. So to answer Councilmember Williams' sort of question, I'm not aware of any change in law that would allow even this board to bind any future board, whether it be this board itself or another entity, which would be another step removed in the ability to exert your power. That is one of the areas of local government you can't bind future boards, except for in very limited circumstances. This would not be one of those that I'm aware of. Taking it yet a step further, which is what our chair is getting to, is that the establishing IGA is a contract between the 5 member governments. This board, the PPRTA board, this entity, is not a party to that agreement. So we have no ability to actually change that agreement or that intent statement on our own. We have been fortunate in that we've sort of been the leading agency, if you will, on initiating the first, second, and third amended and restated IGAs because we needed those changes to continue functioning in the manner that the voters and the member jurisdictions intended us to, and we took the lead on that, but it was not really an action of this board to change that IGA. We just sort of took the lead and shepherded it through the member governments, and it's their IGA, it's not our IGA. And it is from which we derive our power from that and the statute, but we don't have any power actually to change our own IGA without the will of the 5 parties there too.
Is it like something?
Ms. Avila?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, that's okay. You're on now.
Like going to each entity like we did for the GAP funding? Is it akin to that?
It is, yes. So, I mean, it's exactly what it is. So, if this board wished to refer out a change to the IGA to change that intent statement, we could take that lead like we have the last 3 times, like the GAP, which was the last of the 3, and take it to the member governments and request they approve it. But ultimately, it's up to a 2/3 majority of the entire membership, not just who's present that day, of each of those 5 entities to approve it. So we'd have to get 5 2/3 approval votes.
But then the question is, how is it enforced? Even if the
Right.
5 agree by a 2/3 vote of the entire membership of each and every one of the 5 governing bodies, what's the enforcement mechanism?
And that goes back to the first question, which is, and I have not reviewed case law. I didn't know this was going to be a discussion topic today, but off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any change in the law that would make that something that it would actually be enforceable beyond the intent statement.
Mr. Williams.
The only thing that, because we looked at this on the board, some of us did when the city cut the transit funding, and I was then representing a different government. And because of the nature of the agreement, I think the only teeth that's actually, there's the public outcry and encouragement. But the other way is you could say, I'm not going to approve any of the contracts. Now, or we'll refuse to approve your contracts if you're not in compliance. You could do that, but the problem was when the city cut transit funding, we're going to what? Then not fund our part of the transit either? And it's like Russian roulette or mutually assured destruction. It's not a very effective tool. That's the only one I came up with at the time, and we chose not to use it.
Ms. Avila?
Okay, so I appreciate all your comments. I guess that's the exact reason I wanted to put this more in stone, and I'm hearing that we're not able to just because of the past administration, right? So we have an administration that's supported transit and the maintenance of effort, and we've had city council members for the past, 4 years or so on a whole different track, but I'm concerned if that were to happen again, right? We have a different mayor, a different council that takes us into that place again. So that's the reason that I brought it up, to see if there was anything we could do to not dip down that low again, because I was one of the public that was outraged and came here to PPRTA to talk. So,
Mr. Stevens?
Additionally, I believe as we are authorizing our annual budget and we were to see those things, we would have the ability to withhold approval of that budget indefinitely for everything, could we not? I mean, there's anything preventing us from, maybe approving 4 out of 5 entities' proposed budgets and not approving one of them, and then until there's an acceptable budget presented to us? Is that reasonable?
Just to restate that a bit, it's not that we're approving the member entity's budget. Our power is to approve our budget. And to approve our budget, we take recommendations from the 5 member entities. So we could choose to revise or exclude portions of those budgets from this body's budget.
And I would just say that is beyond the nuclear option at that point, because that would be the death of the PPRTA, frankly.
Agreed, and I think that's also the encouragement not to go there.
Right.
Keep that maintenance of effort up so this board doesn't get sideways.
And I think the other thing that we got to keep in mind is that every one of the representatives of the boards here are representatives of the board because we're representatives of other governing entities as well. And as representatives of other governing entities, there's at least a presumption that the representatives sitting here on behalf of the county, on behalf of the cities, on behalf of all the agencies, there's a reason that those entities have made those budgetary decisions for that entity, and that has to be part and parcel of the discussion as well. All right.
So what, there was a discussion of referring to the CAC.
I don't have, and with all that said, I don't have a problem with CAC if CAC feels that this is something that it would like to take a position statement on or talk about. I don't have a problem with them considering that and making a recommendation to us as to what to do. I would defer that, frankly, to the members of CAC. Thank you. Just to have a discussion, if the majority of the Citizens Advisory Committee thinks that it's something that they could provide to us, Jim, I would be okay with that.
We'll bring it up again. We have talked around this a little bit over the years when the city was not up to thing, and I'd be the first to say we certainly appreciate the mayor and the current council and the past council stepping up and making that whole again. We also recognize that you start throwing that on some smaller member entities' budgets, and you start throwing that in, it increases their budgets sometimes beyond their ability to meet that, and then so we kind of start that death spiral again of somebody dropping out too. So there's a fine line there, but we'll be glad to toss it around and see what you think.
Okay, thank you. Item 9C has been pulled, so item 9D, the I-25 Gap Contribution Funding Plan.
is step one. A major step is now completed. The mid-year budget amendment has approved the $3.6 million, and the board chair and vice chair have signed the check. Don't give it to CDOT
No,
until you
not
take
yet.
a picture.
No, I've gotten the picture.
Oh,
to
you
send
got
to
your
my
picture,
kids,
okay.
yes.
So John,
Yeah.
so John Hall of CDOT, I don't know if you want to say anything, John, but there's the check for $3 million.
I just want the
and change.
record to reflect it is in his hand now.
I just don't know why he requested that they put his name on it.
What? What? Yeah. Members of the board, I just want to say thank you. I mean, on behalf of CDOT, for just taking care of this. There's one more step in the project and moving it forward financially, and we appreciate all the effort.
Thank you.
And the work with the IGAs and all that.
All right, so the first payment is made. Okay, anything else on that? Then the GAP project update, 9E.
Not much change from last month, and let me ask the board, the same thing I asked the CAC, is since it's just pretty much in construction now, just moving along, would you entertain, the CAC said yes, would you entertain dropping this off of your agenda on a routine basis and just leaving it up to me to bring it back when there's something major?
I'm okay with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on the GAP 25 update? All right, member announcements. Any member announcements? There being none, it is 2 hours. Ah, doggone it. Done.
An hour and a half.
Hey, you cut an hour off.
Hour and a half. I guess it's an hour and a half. No, it's not that.
It's an hour less than last month.
All right. Rick, Rick, I will be right back.